From the outside, Clara Bennett's life looked picture perfect. She was 38, living in Portland, Oregon, married to a respected architect named Evan, and working as a freelance writer whose short stories often appeared in magazines. She had a home filled with books, warm light, and the quiet comfort that comes from years of stability. Yet, beneath that stillness, she felt something slipping away herself. Her marriage wasn't broken, it was quiet. Evan was kind and steady, but the spark that once pulled them together had faded. They shared meals, schedules, polite laughter, and routine affection. Love had turned into habit, and habit had turned into silence. Clara often sat by her desk late at night, trying to write stories about passion and human connection, while wondering when she had last truly felt either. One gray afternoon, as the city rain painted silver streaks across cafe windows, Clara waited for her editor to arrive. She sipped coffee, lost in thought when a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Noah Price, a photographer she had met years earlier at a book signing. He looked the same, casual, confident, his camera hanging loosely around his neck. "Clara Bennett," he said, smiling, "still writing about love." She smiled back, trying to. They sat together, and the conversation flowed easily. He spoke about his travels, his art, and the stories behind his photographs. Clara found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in weeks. When he showed her a picture of an old couple holding hands in the rain, she felt something warm stir inside. He said, "You'd love this one. They reminded me of something you once wrote, that love doesn't fade, it changes color." When they parted, he said softly, "Let's catch up properly next time." Clara nodded, not realizing how that small moment would begin to change her. Over the next few weeks, she saw Noah again, once at an art exhibit, then by chance at a bookstore, and later through messages that turned into long conversations. He had a way of seeing beauty in ordinary things. He'd send her photos of sunsets, empty park benches, people laughing in the rain, each one paired with a simple line, "Reminds me of something you'd write." His words made her heart stir in ways it hadn't in years, but before she could understand what she felt, another presence entered her life, Ryan Miller. Ryan worked with Evan at his firm. She met him at a dinner hosted for the design team. He was polite, reserved, but his eyes were kind. During the evening, while Evan discussed projects with others, Ryan asked Clara about her writing. Unlike most, he didn't just nod politely. He listened, really listened. When she spoke about her fear of losing inspiration, he said quietly, "Maybe you're not uninspired. Maybe you're just waiting to feel something worth writing about again." His words stayed with her long after the dinner ended. Ryan wasn't charming like Noah. He was steady, calm, the kind of man whose silence spoke more than his words. Over time, they developed a quiet friendship, a connection built on understanding rather than excitement. Sometimes he'd text her articles about writing or photography, or simply ask how her week was going. It was innocent, but emotionally, it started to mean more than she wanted to admit. And then came Thomas Gray. He was a novelist she had admired 4 years older, thoughtful with the kind of voice that carried wisdom. When her editor introduced them at a literary conference in Seattle, she was nervous but thrilled. Talked about storytelling, life, and the fear of losing creativity as one grows older. "Writers like us," he said, "don't fall in love easily. We fall in love with ideas, and sometimes that's even more dangerous." Thomas fascinated her. He had lived through heartbreak, success, and solitude, and he spoke about them without bitterness. When she returned home, he began emailing her drafts of his work, asking for her feedback. Their exchanges were professional at first, but slowly became personal to minds connecting through words. Clara felt drawn to his depth, his sensitivity, and the quiet honesty in his reflections. Now, there were 3 men, Noah, Ryan, and Thomas, each representing something she craved but didn't have. Noah reminded her of passion and youth. Ryan offered comfort and understanding, and Thomas awakened her mind and soul. None of these connections were physical, yet all 3 touched her heart in different ways. At home, Evan noticed her distraction. He'd find her smiling at her phone or staring out the window too long. "You've been distant lately," he said one night. "I'm just tired," she replied. But inside, she felt a quiet panic. She wasn't unfaithful in the usual sense, but emotionally, she was wandering. Days turned into weeks, and Clara felt caught between gratitude and guilt. Noah would send her photographs that made her heart race, not because they were romantic, but because they felt alive. Ryan would message her at exactly the right time, his words steady and kind. Thomas's emails became the highlight of her evenings, each line reminding her how deeply she missed intellectual connection. Evan, meanwhile, was drowning in work. They spoke about bills, deadlines, groceries, everything but feelings. Clara sometimes looked at him and wondered if he even saw her anymore. She missed the man who used to leave her notes, who once took her hand under the table just because he could. But somewhere along the way, that tenderness had vanished. One Sunday morning, she found a photograph Noah had sent her printed on her desk, a woman standing at a crossroads in the rain. It was titled "Waiting for the Light." She stared at it, realizing how symbolic it felt. That same evening, Evan found it too. He didn't say a word, just looked at her quietly. She wanted to explain, but what could she say? That another man's art had reminded her of everything she had forgotten to feel. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The silence between her and Evan was louder than ever. She thought about Noah's laughter, Ryan's warmth, Thomas's voice, and her own emptiness. It wasn't about them, it was about what they represented. They saw her in ways Evan no longer did, and that realization broke her. The next day, she met Noah for coffee. The air between them was heavy. He noticed her sadness instantly. "You look lost," he said gently. "I am," she whispered. "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore." He hesitated. "Do you love him?" Clara didn't answer right away. "I think I've forgotten what love feels like." Noah nodded. "Then maybe you should remember, even if it hurts." She left the cafe feeling both lighter and heavier. It wasn't Noah she wanted. It was the version of herself that came alive around him. Later that week, she ran into Ryan near the library. He asked if she was okay. She smiled weakly. "Just tired," she said again. But Ryan looked at her and said, "You know, sometimes tired just means your soul needs something new." His words were simple, yet they struck deep. When she got home, there was an email from Thomas waiting. It read, "We all live with quiet choices, Clara. Some we make out loud, some we only feel. But every love, even the unspoken ones, change us." She sat staring at those words for a long time. It was true, even without choosing, she had changed. That night, while Evan slept, Clara wrote in her journal, "3 men love me. Each of them reminds me of a piece I've lost. But if I give in to any of them, I'll lose everything that still belongs to me." She closed the journal and whispered to herself, maybe love isn't about choosing someone. Maybe it's about choosing yourself first. But deep down, she knew life wasn't done testing her yet, because when you don't make a choice, the universe often makes one for you. And soon something would happen that would force Clara to face every feeling she had tried to bury, and finally decide what love truly meant. The days that followed felt heavier than usual for Clara Bennett. She tried to return to her writing routine, but her mind refused to stay still. Every paragraph she wrote reminded her of one of the 3 men who had unknowingly tangled themselves in her thoughts. It wasn't desire that haunted her. It was confusion, the quiet ache of being seen by too many and understood by none. Evan still greeted her with the same polite warmth every morning. He'd kiss her cheek, talk about his projects, and rush off to work. There was no malice in him, just distance, like a soft fog that had settled over their marriage. Clara wanted to tell him how lonely she felt even when he was sitting right beside her. But she didn't know how to start that conversation without breaking what was left of their peace. One afternoon, she met Noah Price again. They walked along the waterfront, the air crisp, the waves whispering against the dock. Noah had just returned from a photography trip in Montana and showed her his new work. Pictures of abandoned train stations, quiet roads, and long shadows. Do you ever wonder, he said softly, how something can be empty and beautiful at the same time? Clara smiled faintly. Every day. He looked at her then, not with flirtation, but with quiet understanding. You're scared, he said. Not of being unhappy, but of changing something that feels safe. His words sank into her like stones dropped into deep water. She wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong. But he wasn't. Her whole life had been built around safety, steady love, predictable routines, and polite silence. When they parted, Noah touched her hand gently. It was brief, respectful, but it lingered in her memory. Not because of the touch itself, but because it reminded her of what it meant to feel alive, even for a second. That evening, as she made dinner, Evan spoke about a possible promotion. It might mean longer hours, he said, barely glancing up from his phone. Clara nodded. Of course. Whatever you need. He smiled absently, and for the first time she realized how practiced that smile had become. The one he used to end conversations rather than start them. Later that week, she met Ryan Miller at a small cafe near Evan's office. It wasn't planned. He happened to see her sitting by the window and came over. Ryan was different from Noah.com, gentle, almost reserved. They talked about books, art, and life until time slipped away unnoticed. When she told him she hadn't written anything in weeks, he said, "Maybe your stories are waiting for you to be honest with yourself first." Clara looked at him, unsure what he meant. Honest about what? About what you really want, he replied. Ryan wasn't trying to charm her. He was simply being himself, thoughtful, steady, the kind of man who made you feel safe to tell the truth. When she left the cafe, she realized that she didn't just like his company, she trusted it. A few days later, her editor called. Thomas Gray wanted her opinion on a few chapters of his new novel and had invited her to his mountain cabin for a weekend writing retreat. It was a professional opportunity, but Clara hesitated. Evan encouraged her to go. You need a change of scenery, he said casually. It'll be good for your writing. So she went. The cabin was quiet, surrounded by pine trees and the faint sound of wind moving through them. Thomas was kind, respectful, and deeply observant. They spent hours discussing literature, art, and the loneliness that often follows creative people. One evening, as they sat near the fire, Thomas said, "People think infidelity is about betrayal. But sometimes it's just about finding pieces of yourself you thought were gone." Clara froze. The word infidelity felt heavy in the room. She wondered if he knew about the turmoil inside her, or if he was simply speaking from experience. "I think," she said quietly, "sometimes it starts long before anyone realizes it." He nodded. "That's when it's the most dangerous." There was no romance between them, not in the way people imagine. But there was connection, deep, intellectual, and haunting. When she left the next morning, Thomas handed her a book and said, "Whatever happens, make sure the story you're living is one you'd be proud to write." Back in Portland, Clara couldn't shake his words. She was surrounded by 3 men who cared for her in 3 very different ways. Noah's fire, Ryan's calm, and Thomas's wisdom. Yet she belonged to none of them. Each represented something her marriage lacked. But guilt was beginning to grow inside her. That weekend, she attended one of Evan's firm events. Ryan was there too. He greeted her with his usual warmth, but his eyes held something different, something unsaid. During a quiet moment, he said softly, "You look beautiful tonight." It was simple, innocent even, but it startled her. No one, not even Evan, had said that to her in years. Before she could respond, Evan joined them, smiling, unaware of the invisible storm between his wife and his colleague. Later that night, when they got home, Evan noticed her silence. "You've been somewhere else lately," he said. "I just have a lot on my mind," she answered. He sighed. "I don't know how to reach you anymore, Clara." His honesty broke something in her. She wanted to tell him everything about her loneliness, her doubts, her confusion. But fear stopped her. Instead, she said, "Maybe we just need time." In the following days, Clara avoided both Noah and Ryan. She needed space to think. But distance didn't bring clarity, only more questions. One afternoon, she received a message from Thomas. "Have you written anything new?" She replied, "Only in my mind." He wrote back, "That's where every story begins." His words reignited something in her. That night, she began a new story, one about a woman torn between three men, searching for herself in all of them. As she wrote, she realized the story wasn't about love triangles or betrayal. It was about identity, about how easily one can lose themselves in the eyes of others. By the time dawn came, Clara sat back in her chair and whispered, "I'd become the story I was afraid to write." The next morning, Noah called. "I'm moving to New York," he said. "There's a gallery offering me a long-term project." Clara felt her heart tighten. "That's wonderful, Noah. You deserve it." He hesitated. "I wanted to see you before I go." She paused, then said, "Maybe that's not a good idea." There was silence. Then his gentle voice, "Maybe not. Take care, Clara." When the call ended, she felt something inside her close quietly, like a door that would never open again. Later that week, Ryan stopped by her home to drop off some papers Evan had left at work. Evan wasn't home. They talked briefly at the door, awkward at first, but then Ryan looked at her and said, "I care about you, Clara. I know it's not my place to say, but I do." She froze. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "Ryan," she whispered, "please don't." He nodded, eyes down. "I'm sorry. I just needed to be honest." After he left, Clara sat on the steps, her hands trembling. She wasn't angry, just heartbroken by how messy life had become. That night, Evan returned home early. He found her sitting in the dark. "What's wrong?" he asked. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know who I am anymore." He knelt beside her, confused and afraid. "You're my wife," he said softly. She shook her head. "I used to be." They sat there in silence, two people who had loved each other once but had forgotten how to keep that love alive. In the days that followed, Clara stopped answering messages from all three men. She needed to be alone, not as someone's wife or muse, or a secret dream, but as herself. She spent long mornings walking through the city, writing again, rediscovering her own voice. The ache didn't fade quickly, but it began to change shape. It became a lesson instead of a wound. When Thomas sent one last email, "Did you find your ending?" she replied, "Not yet, but I'm finally writing it myself." And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. But deep down, she knew the final test was still coming, one that would force her to face Evan, the truth, and every choice she had left unfinished. Because love, she realized, isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go before everything else disappears. The winter in Portland came early that year. The trees outside Clara's home stood bare, their branches like reaching hands against the gray sky. The world felt quieter, slower. Inside, the house carried the same stillness to people living side by side but separated by invisible walls. Evan had stopped asking questions. Clara had stopped pretending she had answers, but something had shifted in her. She was writing again. Her desk overflowed with notebooks and drafts, pieces of her heart finally finding their way to paper. The story she had started, the one about the woman and the three men, was no longer fiction. It was her confession disguised as art. Every word felt like a small release, like she was setting something heavy free. One morning, Evan found one of her pages left open on the kitchen counter. He read a few lines before she walked in. Their eyes met, and for the first time in months, neither looked away. "It's good," he said quietly. "But it's painful. It's honest," Clara replied. Evan nodded. "I miss when you used to write happy endings." She smiled sadly. "I don't know how to write those anymore." That night, after he went to bed, Clara sat by the window, thinking about how everything had led her here. The loneliness, the unexpected connections, the words she never said. She didn't regret meeting Noah, Ryan, or Thomas. They had each shown her something she had forgotten: how to feel, how to think, how to be seen. But she realized now that none of them could fix what was broken inside her. That was something only she could do. Still, she owed Evan the truth. The next day, she asked him to go for a walk. They went to the small park near their old apartment, the same one where he had proposed years ago. The air was cold, their breaths visible. "I need to tell you something," she began. Evan looked at her, worry in his eyes. "You're scaring me." She took a deep breath. "I haven't been unfaithful to you, but I haven't been loyal either. Not in the way you deserve. I let myself get lost. I let other people see me in ways I should have only let you." He was silent for a long moment. "Did you love any of them?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe I loved what they reminded me of, who I used to be before everything felt so dull." Evan looked down at the ground, his jaw tight. "So what now?" "I think," she said softly, "we both need to figure out who we are without pretending we're still the same people we were 10 years ago." He turned to her then, eyes wet, voice low. "I don't want to lose you, Clara." "You already did," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We just stopped admitting it." They stood in silence, two people bound by history, but undone by time. Eventually, Evan nodded. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we both need to start over separately." That evening, Clara packed a small bag. She didn't leave in anger or guilt. She left in peace. Evan didn't try to stop her. He helped her carry her suitcase to the car, kissed her forehead, and said, "Take care of yourself, Clara." She drove north, not knowing exactly where she was going. She just needed airspace to breathe without explaining herself, for weeks. She stayed in a small cottage by the coast, spending her mornings writing and her evenings walking by the sea. The isolation felt strange at first, but slowly it became her friend. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. One rainy afternoon, she received an email from Thomas. "I read your latest draft. It's beautiful and painful. I think you've finally written the story you were meant to tell." Clara smiled faintly and replied, "It's the only way I know how to heal." Later that evening, as she sat by the window watching the storm roll in, she got a message from Ryan. "I heard you left Portland. I hope you're okay. You deserve peace, Clara." She didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. His message wasn't an invitation, it was a goodbye, and she accepted it. Noah, the one who had left for New York, sent her a single photograph a month later, a picture of an empty bench facing the ocean. There was no caption, just the image. It said everything. Clara printed the photo and placed it on her writing desk. It reminded her that not every connection is meant to last. Some are meant to awaken. Spring came quietly. The days grew longer, and Clara's new book was finally finished. Her editor loved it, said it was her best work yet. She titled it All the Men I Never Chose. It wasn't about love triangles or guilt. It was about rediscovering oneself after years of silence. When the book was published, it resonated deeply with readers. People wrote to her saying they saw themselves in her story, in her fear, her confusion, her strength. For the first time, Clara realized her pain had a purpose. One morning, she received a letter, handwritten, something rare these days. It was from Evan. "Clara, I read your book. It hurt, but it also made me proud. I see now how lost we both were. I've started going to therapy. I'm learning things about myself I should have faced long ago. Thank you for being honest, even when it broke us. I hope you're happy, truly happy." Evan, she cried when she read it. Not from sadness, but from relief. They had both survived something that once felt impossible. Months later, Clara was invited to speak at a book event in Seattle. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back, her smile genuine. During the Q&A, someone asked, was the story based on real people? She paused, smiled softly, and said, "It was based on real feelings." The audience applauded, not knowing that every word came from her truth. After the event, as she was leaving the stage, she saw a familiar figure waiting near the exit, Thomas. He looked older, calmer. "You made it," he said warmly. "So did you," she replied. They talked for a while, not as writer and editor, not as almost somethings, but as friends who had shared a chapter of each other's journey. Before he left, Thomas said, "You know, sometimes the story doesn't need a perfect ending. Just an honest one." Clara smiled. "I think I finally got that." That night, back in her cottage, she walked down to the shore. The waves shimmered under the moonlight. The sea had become her quiet witness to all her mistakes, her heartbreaks, her rediscovery. She whispered to the wind, "I'm not who I was. But maybe that's the point." A new calm settled in her. She didn't need any of the three men to define her anymore. They were each a chapter, important, beautiful, but complete. The story was hers now. As she stood there, a gentle breeze brushed her face. She closed her eyes and smiled. It wasn't the end of her story, just the beginning of a new one. Written by her own hands, guided by her own heart. Somewhere, far away. Perhaps each of those men thought of her once in a while. Noah with his camera. Ryan with his quiet kindness. Thomas with his pen. And Evan, maybe he smiled when he saw her name on a bookstore shelf. But Clara no longer wondered what could have been. She had finally chosen not any of them, but herself. Because sometimes the truest form of love isn't staying or leaving. It's learning to stand alone and still feel whole. And for the first time in years, Clara Bennett did. She went home that night, lit a candle on her desk, and began typing the first line of her next story. Every ending carries a beginning waiting quietly beneath it. And as the sound of her keys filled the quiet cottage, she smiled, not for the past she'd lost, but for the life she'd finally found.